Hey guys! Tonight, we will listen to a calm and gentle story that will help you relax and drift into a deep, peaceful sleep. Before we begin, make your bed comfortable, dim the lights, and allow your body to fully relax. And allow yourself to be carried away on this quiet, sleepless journey. Let's begin the story. The last cry of battle faded like a dying ember. For a long time, there was only smoke, thick and gray, curling around the dead like a shroud. The air was heavy, unmoving, as if even the wind had forgotten how to breathe. Somewhere in the middle of that stillness, a warrior opened his eyes. He did not rise at once. His body was slow to remember that it could move. The armor that once fit him like a second skin now felt like stone. His breath came out ragged, weak, each inhale tasting of ash and rust. He tried to listen, but there was nothing. No cries, no clash of steel, no thunder of hooves. Only silence, vast, merciless silence. For a moment, he thought perhaps he was dead. He looked at his hand, trembling under the weight of his own sword, or what was left of it. The blade had broken clean near the middle, its edge dulled, its surface darkened by blood and dust. He stared at it, half expecting it to whisper, as it always had in the middle of battle. But the sword said nothing. It was only a thing now, lifeless, like everything else around him. He lifted his gaze. The battlefield stretched endlessly, a sea of bodies, armor glinting faintly under a pale, reluctant moon. Arrows stood upright in the mud like grave markers. A horse lay nearby, its eyes wide open, reflecting the stars that had seen everything. The warrior pushed himself up slowly, his knees sinking into the soft, blood-soaked ground. His joints ached. The sound of metal scraping metal echoed faintly, and in that moment, the noise startled him. After so much silence, even his own movement felt too loud. He rose to his feet and looked around, searching for any sign of life. A flicker of movement, a breath, a whisper. Nothing. Only the whisper of the night, soft and empty. The war, it seemed, had truly ended. But the stillness felt wrong. Too deep. Too complete. As if the world itself had stopped to remember what it had done. He took a step forward, boots sinking into mud, past a fallen shield, past faces he once knew but could not bear to recognize now. Some had died screaming. Others, with eyes open, looked as if they were still waiting for something, orders, forgiveness, maybe peace. He wanted to close their eyes, to give them that peace. But his hands trembled too much to try. The warrior walked on. The battlefield stretched into the distance like a dark sea that would never end. Every few steps, his foot would catch on something, a broken spear, a hand reaching out from beneath the dirt. And then, faintly, he heard it. A sound. Not wind. Not breath. Something else. It was the faint creak of a banner, torn and hanging limply from a pole. The cloth was burned, its color gone, but as it moved, he could still make out a symbol, his kingdom's mark. He reached out and touched it. The fabric crumbled under his fingers. That small, fragile sound, the sound of cloth tearing, echoed louder than all the battle cries he'd ever heard. He closed his eyes and whispered, almost to himself, "Is this what victory sounds like?" The question vanished into the night. He began walking toward the horizon, though he didn't know where it was anymore. The moon had dimmed behind clouds, and even the stars seemed uncertain. He followed the faint slope of the land, the broken path that led away from the ruins of war. Each step felt heavier, as though he carried the weight of every fallen soul. And perhaps he did. He thought of the men he had led, The brothers he'd fought beside, the ones who had believed in his voice when he called them forward. Their faces drifted before him like ghosts in the smoke. He tried to remember all their names, but some slipped away, fading into the dark. He wondered if anyone would remember his. The air grew colder. His breath turned white against the dark, and with every exhale, it looked like his soul was trying to leave him. He stumbled upon a broken shield, his own. The crest, once bright, was scratched beyond recognition. He knelt beside it, running his hand along its edge. His reflection stared back faintly, warped by dents and blood stains. He did not recognize the man looking back. "Who are you?" he murmured. No answer. Only the steady, cold gaze of a face that no longer belonged to him. He rose again and kept walking. His boots crunched over gravel, over bones that cracked softly beneath him. Each sound echoed longer than it should have, bouncing through the emptiness as if the world itself had become hollow. He tried to remember how long the war had lasted. Days? Months? Years? Time had dissolved somewhere between the first battle cry and the last. All he knew was that before the war, he had a name, a home, and a reason. Now he had none. He reached a ridge overlooking the battlefield. From there, he could see everything, or what was left of everything. Fires still smoldered here and there, casting weak, trembling light. The river that ran through the plain glimmered faintly under the moon, a ribbon of silver, cutting through the dark like a scar. It used to be beautiful once. He remembered the morning before the first battle, when that same river had reflected the dawn sky. His soldiers had laughed then, some praying, some boasting, some writing letters home. They were men of life, of warmth. Now, only the river remained. He sat down at the edge of the ridge, feeling the earth cold beneath him. The silence deepened. Somewhere far away, an owl cried once, and then nothing again. The night seemed endless. He looked at his broken sword once more and laid it beside him. It glimmered faintly, the last flicker of something that used to mean purpose. He whispered to it softly, like one speaks to an old friend. "You did well. You can rest now." He closed his eyes and listened to the world. There was peace, yes, but it was a heavy peace. A peace that pressed down like snow on old graves. He lay back slowly, looking at the sky. The stars above him were faint, scattered like forgotten embers. Somewhere beyond all of it, life must have gone on.
Village sleeping.
Children dreaming, lovers holding each other through the cold. He wondered if they knew what price had been paid for their peace. The warrior took a deep breath. The air burned his throat, filled his lungs with smoke and cold. For a moment, he thought of closing his eyes and never opening them again. But then, faintly, he saw something. A light. Far in the distance, beyond the hills, beyond the shadows of war. It flickered gently, golden and steady. Not the wild fire of battle, not destruction. Something softer. He didn't know if it was real or a trick of his mind. But he needed it to be real. So he rose again. Slowly, painfully. Each joint protested. Each scar reminded him of what he had lost. But he walked toward that single light. Every step away from the battlefield felt like peeling off another layer of pain. Behind him, the land of the dead grew smaller, quieter. Ahead, the unknown waited, not with a sword, but with silence. The light grew closer, and as he walked, the sound of his heartbeat began to match his footsteps, steady, slow, human. For the first time, he realized he was not fighting anymore. He was simply existing, and that somehow felt harder. When he finally reached the top of the last hill, the light was gone. Only the mist remained, soft, blue, and endless. He stood there alone, with the broken sword in hand, the war behind him, and silence all around. The wind moved gently again, brushing through his hair like a memory. And for the first time since the war began, the warrior whispered, not to the gods, not to his sword, but to the night itself. Let it end. The dawn came without warmth.
No bird sang.
No wind stirred. The light that crept across the horizon was thin and pale, like something that had forgotten how to be morning. The warrior walked through the mist. Behind him, the battlefield lay hidden beneath it, a sea of silence, swallowed whole by fog. Ahead, only emptiness. He carried the broken sword in his hand. It hung heavy, its weight unfamiliar now. The metal had lost its sheen. The edge had turned to brown and black. When he tilted it toward the faint light, the blade did not catch it, it absorbed it. Once, this sword had been a thing of beauty, forged by fire and prayer, tempered in the blood of both enemy and kin. The blacksmith who made it had said it would never fail its master. And for years it hadn't. Until now. He stopped beside a quiet stream that trickled through stones, the only living sound left in that dead landscape. He knelt, dipped his hand into the cold water, and let it run between his fingers. It was so clean, so painfully pure, that for a moment he couldn't bring himself to drink it. Instead, he placed the sword across his knees and looked at it. The handle was cracked, the hilt darkened. Mud and blood had dried along the grooves where his fingers once gripped with pride and power. He brushed the dirt away gently, as though tending to an old wound. I remember you, he whispered. But do you remember me? The words left his lips like a question thrown into eternity. He ran his thumb along the blade. It caught on a deep notch, the mark of a battle fought long ago.
He remembered that day.
The sun had been brighter, the air alive with dust and rage. His army had stood behind him, their voices thundering his name. He had lifted this sword high, and the world had answered with war.
But now,
when he lifted it, the air didn't move. No echo, no power. It was just metal, cold, forgotten. He closed his eyes and tried to recall the sound it once made when it cut through the air, that sharp, singing note. The way it used to hum, as if alive. He swung it gently now, just once. The blade moved through mist and nothing else. No song, no whisper, only silence. A single droplet of water fell from the sword's tip into the stream below. The ripple spread outward, small and perfect, and gone in an instant. He felt something inside him sink deeper. It wasn't just the sword that had broken. It was the bond. He sat there for a long time, the stream murmuring beside him like a quiet lullaby for ghosts. The world around him seemed suspended, as if waiting for him to say something, to choose what would come next. But he had no words, only memories. And memories, he realized, were heavier than any weapon. He thought of the faces that used to surround him. The laughter of his men before the march, the smell of campfire and sweat, the stories shared beneath the stars. He could almost hear them still, faint and far away. But when he looked around, there was no one, only the mist. He pressed the sword into the ground, blade first, until it stood upright. The soil accepted it easily, swallowing it halfway. For a long time, he simply stared at it. The way it leaned slightly to one side, the way the mist curled around its edge. That sword had once been an extension of his soul. Now it was only a relic of a man who no longer existed. He touched the hilt again, softly. You've forgotten me, he said. But maybe that's mercy. He looked at his reflection in the stream. The The face that stared back was not that of a warrior. The eyes were sunken, the beard thick and unkempt, the skin pale from loss. There was something ghost-like in his own gaze, as though half of him had already gone where his comrades lay. And then something strange. For a moment, the reflection beside his own seemed to shift. A second face appeared in the water, faint, unfamiliar, watching him. He blinked and it was gone. Only ripples remained. He exhaled slowly, unsure if it was memory or madness. The silence played tricks here. It bent reality in ways he didn't understand. He rose and took a step back, watching the stream flow on. Time, he realized, still moved for the water. It carried everything away. Ash, dust, memory. He wondered if it could carry him too. He followed the stream's path for hours. It wound through the barren land, past burned trees and shattered helmets half buried in mud. Every few steps, he thought he heard whispers, faint, like the echo of old commands, ghostly voices calling him by name. But when he turned, there was only fog and his broken sword. At dusk, he came upon the remains of a village, or what used to be one. Stone walls half collapsed, roofs torn by fire, a well standing dry and cracked. The silence here was thicker. It clung to the ruins like grief itself. He stepped inside what might have been a home. A table still stood, covered in dust. A child's toy, a carved wooden horse, lay near the door. He picked it up, brushed the ash off it, and stared. His hand trembled. He didn't remember this place, but the air felt heavy with familiarity, like a memory that refused to show its face. He set the toy back down and whispered, "I'm sorry." The words were small, but the silence answered them. He left the house and walked toward the edge of the ruins. There, near the well, he saw something glint faintly beneath the soil. He knelt and brushed it clean. Another sword, smaller, lighter. Its blade was snapped too, but it bore a mark, his army's crest. He turned it over, and his chest tightened. This had belonged to one of his men, a young soldier, barely grown, who had followed him into every battle with fire in his eyes. He remembered the boy's voice, the way he had once said, "If I die, promise you'll remember my name, my lord." The warrior had promised. Now, standing in the ruins, he realized he had forgotten it. He set the boy's sword beside his own. Two broken blades side by side, one that had seen too much and one that had seen too little. The air around him shifted. A faint hum, almost like the echo of a heartbeat, passed through the ground. The warrior froze. The mist thickened, swirling around the two swords. And then, for a moment, he heard it, the faint, fragile sound of steel singing. Not from his blade, but from the smaller one. It was faint, but it was real. He stared in silence as the sound faded. The world went still again. He did not understand what it meant, whether it was a message, a memory, or the voice of the dead trying to reach him. But he felt something stir inside him, something small, fragile, human. Maybe the sword hadn't forgotten entirely. Maybe some things remember us even when we can't remember ourselves. He looked at both blades, his and the boy's, and for the first time in what felt like centuries, he felt tears in his eyes. He whispered softly, "Then let me remember for you." He picked up the smaller sword and held it close to his chest. The weight of it was light, yet it pressed against his heart like truth. Night fell slowly over the ruins. The mist turned silver in the moonlight, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. The warrior sat beside the two swords, staring at the stars, faint, uncertain, but still there. He thought about what it meant to survive a war when everything else had died. He thought about what a weapon becomes when it's no longer needed. And he thought about the way silence can feel like both punishment and mercy. He did not pray.
He did not sleep.
He simply sat there, breathing, remembering, being. The wind moved again, gentle, carrying the scent of rain. Somewhere far away, thunder murmured like a promise. The warrior lifted his gaze and whispered into the night, "If the sword can forget, maybe so can I." The first drop of rain touched his face. Then another. The ground began to tremble softly, as if the world itself exhaled. The fire-blackened soil drank deeply, washing away the stains of war, of grief, of memory. He closed his eyes, letting the rain fall. And for the first time since the silence began, the world made a sound again. The rain stopped before dawn. Mist drifted over the ruins, folding the world in slow, gray layers. Each droplet that clung to stone and ash shimmered faintly, as if the night still breathed within it. The warrior woke beneath a collapsed archway, his back stiff, his thoughts slower than the morning light. He had slept without meaning to, if that could be called sleep at all. Dreams had passed through him like strangers on a road, whispering things he could not hold. When he rose, the air felt heavier. The silence had changed. It was no longer empty, it listened. He stepped out onto the path that once led through the center of the village. Broken carts, shattered doors, forgotten tools. Each object lay where it had fallen years ago, untouched, unclaimed. Only the wind moved, soft and restless. At first, it was only a sigh, but then words. Faint, carried between breaths. "Here, stay close." The warrior froze. He turned slowly, scanning the ruins. The voice was neither near nor far, but it threaded the air like smoke. He waited, heart still. Another whisper followed. "Do not go beyond the hill. The fire sleeps there." He knew that voice, or thought he did. The sound came not from one direction but from all, as if the wind itself spoke through hollow walls and broken helmets. He stepped forward. "Who's there?" his voice cracked, dry from silence. The wind paused, then moved again, swirling through a collapsed doorway. He followed. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and ash. He saw outlines of what once was a table, a bed frame, a shelf with a single rusted bowl, and on the wall faint carvings, names. He brushed away the dust with his fingers. Letters appeared, uneven, hurried. He recognized one of them. It was the name of a soldier who had fought beside him, Taran, the boy with the scar that never healed. His breath caught. Another gust swept through the room, knocking the bowl to the floor. It rolled and came to rest beside his boot. He bent to pick it up and heard it again. A whisper, closer now. "Captain, you left us." He dropped the bowl. The sound wasn't in the air this time. It was in his head, like a memory that had learned how to speak. He stumbled outside, gasping, the mist wrapping around him like hands. "No," he said aloud. "I buried you all." I watched the ground close. But the wind only answered with more voices, rising, layering, hundreds of them. "Do you remember us? Did we win? Was it worth it?" Each question sliced through him, not as accusation, but as sorrow. He pressed his palms over his ears. Enough. The world went still. Only his ragged breathing remained. He lowered his hands slowly. His heart pounded so loudly it seemed to echo through the ruins. Then, far away, a bell rang once, a dull, hollow note. The sound rolled over the valley and faded into mist. He turned toward it, the bell tower. He had seen it before, half collapsed, standing like a broken spine at the village's edge. Something in him pulled toward it now. He walked, step after step, through mud and memory. The voices no longer called, but he felt them trailing behind, a soft murmuring, as though the air carried their breath. When he reached the tower, he stopped at the threshold. The wooden door hung loose on one hinge. Inside, darkness waited, thick and cool. He entered. The smell of rust and earth filled his lungs. Shafts of pale light slipped through cracks in the stone, illuminating dust that floated like snow. The bell hung above, massive, silent, cracked down one side. Its last note still lingered in his mind, though the air was quiet. He climbed the narrow stairs, one slow step at a time. Each board creaked, each echo seemed to breathe. Halfway up, he paused. There, carved into the wall beside the stair, were words, faint but readable. The wind remembers all names. He ran his fingers over the letters. They were cold. When he reached the top, the view opened before him, endless gray hills rolling under a dull sky. The village below looked small, almost unreal, as if painted in dust. He touched the bell's rim. It was cold, rough with corrosion.
He pushed it gently.
Nothing. He closed his eyes and whispered the words again, to no one. The wind remembers all names. A faint breeze stirred. It circled him once, brushing his hair. Then it moved past him, out through the cracks, into the open world. And then voices again. Not loud this time. Not haunting. Gentle. They came like the murmur of a river, familiar and distant. Thank you for carrying us. We are lighter now. We will follow the wind. He stood frozen, tears rising unbidden. The bell moved, not by his hand, but by the breeze. It swung slightly, just enough for the cracked edge to tap the side. A single tone rang out.
Soft.
Fragile. It shimmered through the air like silver smoke. When it faded, so did the voices. Only the wind remained, free again. He stood there for a long time, breathing quietly. The air felt cleaner, lighter. The silence no longer pressed down, it lifted. He looked out at the gray hills and whispered, "Then go. Be at peace." The wind answered with a single sigh and was gone. He descended slowly, his hand brushing the cold wall for balance. When he stepped outside, sunlight had begun to break through the mist. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, the ruins no longer looked haunted. They looked resting. He found a stone near the well and sat down. The broken swords still lay where he had left them, glinting faintly in the light. He took the smaller one, the boy's sword, and pressed it to his heart again. He did not weep this time. He only closed his eyes and listened. There were no more voices. Only wind, clean, unburdened, passing softly through the hollow streets. He whispered, almost to himself, "I will remember your names. You can rest now." The breeze brushed past his cheek, warm, fleeting, like a final touch of farewell. The war was not gone, but its echo had changed. Where once it screamed, now it sang softly, a hymn of release. The warrior sat until the day turned gold, his eyes half closed, his breath steady. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again. Not angry this time, but distant, like the slow heartbeat of the world returning to life. He looked at his reflection in the blade, still cracked, still old, and saw not a ghost, but a man beginning to breathe again. The wind moved through the ruins one last time, and though he could no longer hear the voices within it, he knew they were there, free, carried beyond the hills, beyond memory, beyond war. He whispered, "Goodbye." And for the first time, silence truly meant peace. The sun fell quietly behind the hills, leaving the ruins bathed in a dim, bluish light. The air was calm, almost too calm, the kind that carries memories instead of sound. The warrior sat beneath the old well, the two swords beside him, listening to the slow breath of the earth. Evening was coming, but the world around him no longer obeyed time. Day and night moved like ghosts, fading into each other without meaning. He rose, stretching stiff muscles, and began to walk toward the western edge of the village. There was no destination, only movement. The silence no longer scared him, but it still felt heavy, like a cloak soaked with years of grief. The wind had grown tired, too. It no longer whispered names. And yet, something lingered in the air. A faint scent. Smoke. He froze. At first, he thought it was his imagination, another trick of the mist. But the smell was real. Faint, sharp, familiar. Burnt wood. He followed it. The smell led him beyond the last line of broken houses, past the old watchtower, down into a hollow where the earth still bore the scars of battle. There, amidst ash and ruin, a single light flickered. A torch. It stood upright in the blackened ground, flames trembling but alive, golden against the gray. The sight stopped him in his tracks. Everything else here was dead, but that small fire burned. He approached slowly, almost afraid to disturb it. The closer he came, the warmer the air grew. Not harsh, but gentle, like a pulse. He knelt before it. The torch was ancient, its wood charred, its base half buried in the soot. The flame danced quietly, refusing to die. Each flicker seemed to breathe, to sigh, to remember.
He stared at it, lost.
"How?" he whispered. The fire didn't answer, but it swayed once, as though acknowledging the question. He sat cross-legged before it, the way one might sit before an altar. The warmth against his face was soft, soothing, and yet something inside him trembled. He reached out, hesitated, and then placed his palm just above the flame. The heat licked his skin gently. It did not burn him. It felt alive. He closed his eyes and let his mind drift back to the last night of the war. He remembered torches everywhere, in hands, on walls, falling from dying fingers. The sky had glowed red as the battle raged, and he had led the charge through fire and screams. He remembered lighting this very valley, the ground shaking beneath them. And then, silence. Now, centuries later, one flame still remained. Perhaps it had waited for him. He opened his eyes. The torch wavered again, and for a moment, he thought he saw something within the flame. Shapes, faces, shadows flickering in its core. He leaned closer. The fire changed, its color deepened to amber, then to crimson. Within it, images moved like memories set alight. He saw himself, younger, fierce, shouting commands. He saw his comrades, the laughter before the storm, the oaths sworn under stars. And then, the moment everything ended, a flash of steel, the thunder of collapse, and darkness swallowing sound. The flame flickered violently, then steadied. He pulled back, breath trembling. Was it showing him the past, or reminding him what he had tried to forget? He whispered, "Why are you still here?" The torch answered with a sudden crack, a sharp pop, like a heartbeat. A small ember jumped, landing near his boot. He stared at it. The ember glowed for a few seconds, then faded. It reminded him of something he'd once told his men. A single spark is enough to bring back the sun. He hadn't meant it then, but now, sitting before the stubborn flame, he began to wonder if the words had been true. He reached down and dug a small trench around the torch with his hands, clearing the ash, giving it air. The fire responded, flaring gently, brighter now, as if grateful. He smiled, the first real smile in years. "Still fighting, aren't you?" he murmured. The flame shivered, its light dancing across his face. He could almost believe it was listening. As the night deepened, the fire painted the world in warm hues. The black stones around him glowed faintly, as though remembering the color of life. Above, the sky was vast and empty, stars hidden behind clouds. He stayed there for hours. The torch's light didn't fade, and with each flicker, something inside him softened, the hard edges of memory dulling under warmth. He realized then, this fire wasn't just burning wood. It was burning time. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought he had buried in silence. The flame was feeding on them, transforming sorrow into light. When the wind passed through again, it didn't sound like ghosts. It sounded like sighs of relief. He whispered to the fire, "You've seen it all, haven't you?" The torch swayed. A single spark drifted upward, small, fragile, but bright. It floated into the night and vanished. He followed its path with his eyes until it disappeared into mist. Maybe, he thought, it was carrying something, a prayer, a promise, a memory too heavy to hold. He looked at his hands, scarred, old, shaking slightly. "Maybe you're the last piece of the war," he said softly. "The part that still remembers." He leaned closer to the flame, voice barely above breath. "But I can't carry it forever." The torch flickered once, twice, and then steadied again, unyielding. It refused to die. He exhaled slowly, a deep tiredness settling in his bones. There was something almost holy about this small defiance, this quiet refusal to end. He took one of the broken swords, pressed its tip into the fire until the metal began to glow faintly red. The sight was both beautiful and sad, as if the weapon, too, wanted warmth after so much cold. When he pulled it out, the blade smoked gently, the heat tracing cracks that had long been hidden. He placed it beside the torch. Both shimmered, one of fire, one of steel. Two survivors. He stared at them, then whispered, "Then burn as long as you can. I'll keep watch." The night stretched on. Stars began to appear, faint pinpoints breaking through the clouds. The mist retreated slowly, curling away into the hills. The warrior leaned back, watching the light play across the valley. In that flickering glow, the ruins didn't look ruined anymore. They looked alive, like the world was remembering itself. He closed his eyes, letting the warmth seep through him. He thought of all he had lost, and how this small flame still stood, defiant, unbroken. And in that defiance, he found something like peace. The torch flickered one final time, brighter than before, and for an instant, the air shimmered with gold. The warrior thought he saw figures in the light, faint outlines, familiar shapes. His men, standing in the glow, smiling. He reached out, but they were gone. Only the torch remained. He smiled again, tears tracing quiet paths down his cheeks. "Rest now," he whispered. "You've done enough." The flame dimmed, not out of weakness, but as if bowing to his words. It continued to burn, steady, eternal. He turned away, stepping back toward the village, leaving the fire behind him, still glowing softly, like a guardian that refused to fade. And as he walked, the valley glowed faintly in his wake, as though the fire had passed a piece of itself into everything it touched. Even the mist seemed warmer, even the silence kinder. By the time the first light of dawn touched the horizon, he had already disappeared into it, a shadow among ashes, guided by a flame that would never die. The warrior walked through the drifting haze, where smoke rose from the dying ground like the ghosts of forgotten prayers. Each step crunched over charred leaves and silent stones. The sky above was bruised with gray, the sun hidden as though even light was too afraid to look upon what was left behind. For miles, there was only stillness, until, far beyond the battlefield, he saw faint outlines of rooftops. A village, small, quiet, breathing in the mist like it was alive. He hesitated.
Part of him wanted to turn back.
But his feet, heavy, trembling, yet pulled by something unseen, moved forward. The arrival. The gate of the village stood half-broken, its wood darkened by years and fire. As he pushed it open, it groaned softly, like a tired voice remembering pain. The path inside was lined with cobblestones, cracked and uneven. Faint footprints, perhaps his own from years ago, lingered in the dust. The air smelled of rain and burnt wood. Somewhere in the distance, a windsheam rattled, not because of the wind, but as though something invisible had brushed past it. The warriors stepped deeper. Old lanterns hung from poles, their light long gone but their glass still glowing faintly, like memory refusing to die. On both sides, wooden houses stood silent, doors closed, windows fogged with age. It was empty, and yet, it didn't feel empty. Each shadow seemed to shift slightly when he wasn't looking. The silence here was not absence, it was presence. It listened, breathed, waited. Echoes of the past. He stopped by a small well in the village square. The water inside reflected his face, older, tired, and covered in ash. But for a fleeting moment, he saw another face beside his. A child.
Smiling.
A boy with bright eyes who once waited for him to return from battle. He blinked, and the reflection vanished. The warrior's heart trembled. His hand reached for the water again, but only ripples stared back. He whispered to himself, "Are you still here?" The wind stirred. Somewhere a door creaked open, then softly closed again. He turned toward it, gripping his broken sword like a crutch. "Who's there?" he asked quietly, though even his voice sounded foreign, an echo from another life. No one answered. Only a small gust of wind passed through the alley, carrying the scent of wet earth and something faintly sweet, like jasmine. That scent, it belonged to her. The woman who had lit a lantern every night, waiting for him. The house by the river. He followed the scent through narrow paths until he reached a small house near a quiet stream. Its wooden door was still standing, though covered in moss. The warrior placed his palm on the handle, and it was warm. He stepped inside. Dust danced in pale light streaming through a cracked window. The room was untouched, a chair by the hearth, a half-burned candle, a shawl hanging from a hook. On the wall, a faded painting, two figures standing beside a field of wheat. He stepped closer. His own face stared back at him from the painting, younger, unscarred, smiling. The woman beside him was holding something, a child's hand. He touched the edge of the frame. The wood felt alive, as though it still remembered their touch. A deep ache grew in his chest, not from wounds, but from memory. He sank into the chair and closed his eyes. Outside, the stream whispered softly against the stones, like an old lullaby. The whispering stream. He remembered the night before the last war, the same sound of water, the same soft glow of lanterns. She had sat beside him by this very stream and said, "When the war ends, come back here, no matter how long it takes." He had promised, but promises, like swords, rust with time. Now he was here, not victorious, not alive in spirit, just breathing. He rose and stepped outside. The mist thickened around him. The village looked different now, as though it had been waiting for him all this time. He walked toward the bridge, where the water reflected the moon like a cracked mirror. And then, faintly, he heard footsteps behind him. Slow, gentle, deliberate. He turned. No one. Only drifting petals floating down the river, glowing faintly like embers. The warrior's breath quickened. He whispered into the fog, "If you are still here, forgive me." A whisper answered, not from the air, but from within his heart. "We never left." The return. Tears blurred his vision. For the first time since the war ended, he felt warmth, not of fire, but of memory. He knelt by the stream and placed his sword on the ground. The broken blade reflected the faint light of the lanterns, and for a heartbeat, it looked whole again. He watched it shimmer, then fade. The wind softened. The air grew still. It was as though the village had finally exhaled, a long-held breath finally released. He whispered, "I'm home." And the mist moved, gently wrapping around him like arms that remembered. The houses stopped sighing.